watcher. Now, do you remember when we were definitely leaving the European Union on the 29th of March and then in just a couple of days on the 12th of April? Well, she in the end decided that a no-deal Brexit would probably lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom, and she's not having that. And anyway, this Labour backbencher, Yvette Cooper, made history by pushing through legislation from the backbenches in record time that forced the Prime Minister to ask for a Brexit delay. Now, as we've gone to air, we still don't know how long that delay will be, but it'll be at least 11 weeks, maybe a whole year. Now, what this means will depend on whether his talks with the government on a Brexit compromise turn out to be more fruitful than many expect, but right now it's much more plausible than it was that Brexit will never happen. And because that makes her party very, very angry, we may have a new Prime Minister pretty soon indeed. Now, can you stand all the tension, Anushka?
It definitely is tense tonight, Robert, in Brussels. Theresa May had an hour to make her presentation, calling for an extension until June the 30th, and the news that came out was that she did better than last time. But senior EU figures like Donald Tusk and Angela Merkel want a longer extension, which could be cut short if the PM passes her deal. But not every leader agrees, as ITV's Paul Brand has tweeted. French President Emmanuel Macron is digging in and holding things up. He wants a much shorter delay because he doesn't trust the UK, perhaps under a new Prime Minister, to behave itself. Now, hopefully they've managed to finish dessert by now, which we do know is an iced macadamia nut parfait. I am not joking, but we do not have a proper resolution. So look, if it is a longer extension, it could be really, really bad news for the Prime Minister. Look what Tory MP Peter Bone has tweeted. He's reminded people of what Theresa May said at PMQs in March. As Prime Minister, I could not consider a delay beyond the 30th of June, asking, so, if the PM intends to keep her word, can we expect her resignation later tonight? A pithy response from Nicholas Soames on the other side of the party, #no. But it is not just Peter Bone. Ian Duncan-Smith, the former leader, also talking tonight on Channel 4 News that a long delay would be an utter car crash. And then he would hope that members of the Cabinet, perhaps like our guests tonight, might go to her and say, this can't go on. I'm afraid it really can't go on. And if all of that's not bad enough, they would then have to fight the European elections. And look at this poll for Open Europe. The Tories on 23%, way behind Labour. Some of it may have gone to the Lib Dems, but look at this. Nigel Farage's Brexit party on 10.3%, and they've not even launched yet. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by our Parliament of the multi-talented Justine Greening, John Whittingdale and Melanie Onn. John, you were saying only a few minutes ago that you do fear that if the European Parliament elections happen in the UK, and they do look as though they are going to, that it will be a bit of a car crash for your party.
Well, I think the poll we've just seen rather bears that out. There is huge anger out in the country. As you said in your introduction, people were assured we would be leaving on the 29th of March. We were then told there would be a brief delay till the 12th of April, and now we're talking about an indefinite extension. And I come from a constituency that voted to leave, and people simply don't understand why nearly 3 years after the referendum we're still there, and it now looks as if we're going to be there for much longer. And I fear that my party will pay a price for that, not just in the European elections. I have candidates in my constituency out at the moment canvassing for the local elections, and they are encountering the same anger on the doorstep that I think all of us are now finding.
Justine, how humiliating is it, do you think, for the Prime Minister? You know, here we are. She promised to deliver Brexit on the 29th of March, and actually our fate when we leave, indeed almost some would say whether we leave, is now being decided by 27 other countries.
Well, I'm tempted to say welcome to Brexit, but I do think that this eventuality of a gridlock parliament, no decisions being taken, and us getting to now beyond the 12th hour, frankly, was eminently predictable. And the problem has been that the government hasn't taken decisions based on the real world and has ploughed on regardless, in spite of meaningful votes that were held and massively lost. So what was needed was a change of strategy, and we haven't had one, and that's why we've ended up in the position that we're in now.
I mean, if in the end, and it's not clear what's going to happen tonight, France's President Macron, very clear he doesn't want a long delay, not because he has a lot of confidence in the UK, but actually mostly because he thinks a long delay would mean that Theresa May's successor would essentially wreck the ability of the EU to get anything done. And he just wants, he's effectively implying that he wants us out as soon as possible. If he loses and it's a delay of a year, I mean, that really takes the pressure off many MPs having to vote for any kind of deal. Do you think we Brexit at all in those circumstances?
Well, we do need a decision. I mean, you can't have the level of uncertainty that we've had over the past, well, nearly 3 years.
But you want a referendum, and many many would say if it's a long delay, you'll get your way.
I think we need to take a decision. Parliament cannot, government seemingly cannot, and therefore the public has to. There's no point in having a general election. I don't think anybody wants that. And it's a party political solution to an issue, Brexit, that cuts across party politics. We absolutely have to now bite the bullet, find a direction. If we're going to have a long extension, make sure we use it to actually fix Brexit, find a direction forward, and then perhaps we can get on to some of the things that Parliament's failed to look at for the last 3 years, like housing, social mobility, social care, all of those other issues that actually matter to people day to day.
Melanie, from the Labour Party, you don't want a referendum, do you, personally? Would you like to see your leaders, in fact, John McDonald is on the programme a little bit later, would you like to see their talks with the Prime Minister leading to something you could vote for?
Absolutely. I mean, I hope that people have gone into that with a genuine open spirit and a desire to get a resolution. I mean, I think that if anybody looks back, they will say, wouldn't it have been much better if the Prime Minister had have opened her arms out and tried to bring everybody around the table and work through a solution? Now, that hasn't happened. We're trying to do it very late on. There's an issue of trust, but I hope that the conversations that are taking place with Labour's front bench and the Prime Minister do result in something that encourages people like me to support it. But the issue that you were talking about with Macron and the issue of trust and who's going to deliver Brexit is a really big hurdle because whatever you agree now, potentially, is not going to be delivered by the Prime Minister that we currently have.
So I'm just going to pick all of this up with the Foreign Secretary in just a second. But, John, just very briefly, Ian Duncan-Smith, your colleague, said only tonight that he thinks this is such a terrible humiliation that the Prime Minister needs to go now. Do you agree?
Well, I do think we need fresh leadership. I mean, I was one of those who signed a letter back last November, and the reason I did was because this seemed to me inevitable, that if she continued on the course she was determined, which was forcing through a deal which simply wasn't going to get the support of Parliament, then we would end up where I'm afraid we are now today. And I do think that it is time for a change of leadership, and I think that is becoming increasingly the view of more and more of my party.
I'll come back to you on all of that in just a moment or two, but I just want to pick up, actually, with what your colleague John has just said. I mean, the Prime Minister pledged to deliver Brexit. She pledged to deliver it first on the due date of 29th of March, then actually just 2 days from now. That's not going to happen. So shouldn't you do what Ian Duncan-Smith says, you and the other members of the Cabinet, tell the Prime Minister it's time for a change?
I think a lot of the problems that we're facing are actually the problems of not the Prime Minister, but the fact that it's a hung Parliament. It is an incredibly controversial issue, one of the most controversial issues in our lifetime, and we don't have a majority in Parliament to deliver that.
But some would say that's her fault too, because she called that election that lost the majority.
Well, she's the first to take responsibility for that election, but I think what no one would fault her on is her total determination to honour her promise to the British people that she would deliver Brexit, and she is leaving no stone unturned to do that.
But why should British people have confidence that she will deliver on that promise, given that she has singularly failed to do that so far?
Well, I think they know, for all the criticism that any Prime Minister attracts, and certainly that she's attracted, that this is someone who is totally and utterly determined to deliver Brexit. And I think there is a central reason why, even despite the doom and gloom, we can have some optimism here, which is in all the votes that Parliament has had, what you can see is that there is a decent majority of MPs on all sides, not just people like John, but also people like Melanie on the Labour side, who want to deliver Brexit. And so what we need to do is to find a way, with the Parliament we have, of delivering that Brexit. Because for me, you know, the big democratic catastrophe here is if we have a situation where our Parliament, one of the oldest parliaments in the world, and certainly the oldest parliamentary democracy in the EU, having promised to give this decision to the people, and promised to implement that decision, then finds a way of unpicking it. Because the thing about Brexit is that the 52% who voted for Brexit, that they actually knew that people like you and me were against it. And they were saying to us, you know, this is a bit of a test. You say we're an old democracy. We're going to give you the ultimate test. We're going to actually ask you to do something you don't want to do. And we're going to see whether this really is a democracy. And those are people who actually often don't trust the political establishment. And if we proved their worst fears right, that would be a terrible, terrible moment for Parliament and for our democracy. And that's why the most important thing in all of this is that we do deliver Brexit, we deliver it cleanly, and we deliver it quickly.
But quite a lot of your colleagues equally believe that if we were to leave without a deal anytime soon, that would do so much damage to our safety, to our prosperity, even, I mean, Prime Minister fears, to the unity of the UK, the risk that Northern Ireland and Scotland would break away. I mean, surely that, in your view, is a greater risk, isn't it?
Well, I have never thought we should aim for no deal. I've never wanted no deal, precisely because of all those risks. But I've also always thought that, you know, we are a big enough and strong enough country that we could cope with the challenges.
Can I ask, because it was reported that at the last Cabinet meeting, in the morning you were in favour of no deal, and then in the afternoon you backed the extension. Is that right?
No, it's not true at all. And I've always said that I think that we are a great country and we can flourish and prosper with whatever is thrown at us. But I wouldn't want to aim for no deal. What I want to do is to deliver
So you backed the Prime Minister's decision to delay, you know, consistently through that Cabinet meeting?
Well, it's clear that we, you know, as things stand at the moment, we are not going to get a majority of the Prime Minister's deal, so we have to find another way of delivering an orderly Brexit, and that's why she's leaving no stone unturned to do that.
Do you understand why so many of your colleagues are uncomfortable that she is relying on Jeremy Corbyn to help you deliver Brexit, given that the rhetoric of pretty much every Tory MP, and certainly every Tory minister, has been that he's unfit to be Prime Minister?
Well, I think we do think he's totally unfit to be
But
Prime
so why
Minister.
is he fit to deliver the most important decision this country has faced for generations?
Because the people watching this programme at home, Robert, they are saying, when are you going to get on and deliver Brexit? And we have to find that majority. And that
but it's odd that you trust his judgment on that, and, which many people would say is even more important than anything else.
Well, I think what people are expecting us to do, because they know Brexit is one of those issues that cuts in between parties, it cuts across parties. They know there are reasonable people like Melanie who want to do what their constituents voted for, and they're saying, look, if there are people in different parties who want to do the right thing, then for goodness sake, talk to them, get on with it, and find a way to deliver Brexit. And, you know, none of us know if these talks are going to work, but to answer Melanie's question, we are going into them sincerely to see if there is any common ground. But, you know, what people at home are saying is they want this sorted. They want it done.
They do want it sorted. And obviously you're hopeful that it still will be sorted. How likely is it it'll be sorted by May the 22nd? In other words, how likely is it that you will avoid having to fight the European parliamentary elections?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, let alone an iced macadamia nut parfait to look at to tell you the answer to that question. But, you know, the fact is, the one thing, despite all our arguments on Brexit, the one thing the Conservative Party is totally united on is that none of us want to fight those European Parliament elections.
Because you'll do appallingly badly, according to the polls.
Well, not for that reason. It's because we promised to leave the EU, and we wanted to leave by the end of March. That wasn't possible. We certainly want to leave by the 22nd of May. Because that means we don't have to take part in those elections.
The Labour Party has made it absolutely clear its terms for an agreement. One of those terms is that the UK would have to be permanently in the customs union. Your colleague Liam Fox, who's in charge of trade in the government, wrote a very detailed letter explaining why that would be a catastrophe. Do you agree with Liam?
Well, Liam knows more about trade and trade deals than anyone else in the government, because that's what he's been doing solidly for the last 2 years. And I completely agree with his view that a customs union would not work for a large economy the size of the UK. If you think about, like, the interests of the Scotch whisky industry, are they really going to accept a situation where the EU is doing all their trade deals when they totally depend on exports without them having any say at all? I mean, give you another example. I was health secretary before. I think last time I came on your show, I was health secretary.
Right.
And, the EU would be able to decide that American companies could bid for NHS contracts without us, as the UK, having any say at all on an issue that, is very emotive to a lot of people in this country. So I don't think it's the right solution.
So where is the scope for a compromise with Labour if their core demand can't be met by you?
Well, what we're trying to do is understand their core demand, because they've said that they want a customs union with a say, and they've said they want us to be able to negotiate our own trade deals. So we're trying to understand if there is common ground.
Well, as luck would have it, John McDonald's coming on in a moment, and I will put your points to him. I fear that the common ground between the two of you is shrinking as we speak. The fundamental question, though, for many people, is not just when we leave the EU, but whether, if you believe in Brexit, Theresa May is the right person. Do you think that her pledge to leave, if her deal is agreed, can be as conditional as that? Do you think she's inevitably going to have to go, whether or not she gets her deal through within the next couple of months?
Well, look, what I will say is that I don't think we could have a Prime Minister, any Prime Minister, who is more determined to deliver Brexit than Theresa May. She is absolutely focused on this, and she is leaving no stone unturned to do that. And I do think when our Prime Minister is in Brussels, trying to bat for Britain, to get us an extension, she wants a short extension that will give her the time to forge that majority in Parliament. We need to back her, because that's what people at home want. They are thinking about their futures. They think, just as Justine said just now, there are lots of things they are worrying about other than Brexit, and they want the political debate to move on, and they want us to solve this and do that. And I think that for the Conservative Party, I mean, you were talking earlier about general election, I think it would be absolutely catastrophic for us to face the people again in a general election if we have not delivered Brexit, which was our central promise at the last election.
Tons more to discuss with you. I think, Anushka, you've just got a couple of things you want to share with us, is that right?
Yeah, because it's quite interesting. On the one hand, there is this short-term problem for the Tories, maybe for not being Brexity enough. But this week, we're also learning about a longer-term issue for the party from a different direction. It's about younger people, many of whom did vote Remain. Now, it's always been the case that people tend to switch from Labour to the Tories as they get older. The question is, at what age do they do it? Now, Matt Hancock, Cabinet Minister, who I think fancies himself as a leadership contender, perhaps like other people in this room, said yesterday that that age had gone from when you get your first paycheck to when you get your first winter fuel allowance. Now, that is in your 60s. And the truth is, he is not far off. Look at this shocking new polling he was talking about. This is the Tories' demographic time bomb. That is the age of people along the bottom. Red is when they vote Labour, blue is Tory. Now, in 2017, before the general election, the crossover age was 34. That means more people over 34 voted Tory, more below voted Labour. That has changed dramatically. Labour well ahead by now. Now, by the time of the election, that had gone up to 47, so less a youth problem, more a middle-age problem. And then this new polling, look at it now, age 51. And even after that, there is another blip for the Tories, and it only crosses over at 56, so almost reaching retirement. Now, for this, I have three geeks of the week. Will, James and Joe from Onward and Hanbury Strategy. Now, excuse my language, but another Cabinet Minister, Penny Mordaunt, said that this would be a kick up the arse for the Tory party. And I was speaking to former Tory MP Nick Bowles, and he admitted this could be an existential problem. He suggested that it could be changed around if they had a long leadership campaign that ends with fresh blood, i.e. nobody from the current Cabinet. Robert.
I mean, Jeremy, many people think you are the candidate to beat when the election comes. What are you going to do about this problem?
Well, first of all, I'm very hesitant about being rude about people over the age of 51 because I'm actually 52 myself.
Nobody's asking you to spur existing Tory voters, but you are. But literally, if those trends continue, you are a dying party.
We have got to turn that around, and I think it's absolutely wrong for any Conservative to say we don't need the votes of young people because they're the future, not just of the country, they're the future of our party as well. And to do that, we have to win the battle of values. They have to think we're on the same page as them in terms of our beliefs, but also the battle of aspiration. And we are the party that has, since we were in office in 2010, hardly the easiest of economic circumstances, we've created more than 1,000 jobs every single day that we've been in office. And that is creating thousands of opportunities for young people. And we've got to find a way of getting a message across to young people that for them and their families, we are the party that offers them the most secure future.
Now, as Foreign Secretary, I do want to talk to you just in a minute or two about the crisis in Libya, but one final question on sort of Brexit and leadership before we move on. One of the things that the Labour Party is concerned about is that if they do a deal with Theresa May, she may not be in office to honour it. One of the things that Emmanuel Macron is concerned about is if the EU does a deal with Theresa May, she may not be in office to honour it. Were you to succeed her, would you honour any deals to get Brexit through Parliament, to, play nicely by the EU that Theresa May does over the next week or two?
Well, look, I understand why people are asking those questions, but the reality is that to get the Brexit deal through, the withdrawal agreement bill has to be ratified in law, and it is the contents of that bill that will constitute any cross-party agreement that allows Parliament to vote that through. So it'll be a matter of the law, not a matter of
laws can be
good
changed.
faith.
Prime ministers can change laws.
They can, if they have a majority in Parliament. It may have escaped your attention, Robert, that no one has a majority in Parliament to change the law. So, that's the conundrum that we face.
Now, there is a serious crisis in Libya. Some would say partly of our own making, since it was connected to the bombing that took place when David Cameron was Prime Minister back in 2011 in partnership with the French. Is this a mess of our making?
Well, we certainly have a special responsibility for making sure that there is stability in Libya because of the decisions that we took back in 2011. And I think we also have to have some humility in looking at what's happened, not just in Libya, but Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and say that much as we want to promote democracy in the Middle East, the sort of Western boots on the ground strategy has not always been successful, but we are very involved in trying to make sure that we don't have the start of a brutal civil war in Libya. And one thing I would just say in the context of the earlier discussion is that, I mean, I've met 54 foreign ministers since I've took on this job. That's a quarter of all the countries in the UN. And the one thing that really hits you in the face when you're foreign secretary is that other countries have a whole lot more respect for Britain than we sometimes seem to have for ourselves.
Oh, I should hope so too.
Well, one of the reasons is because they see us having a very active role, not just in...
How many of them say to you, though, we wish you were staying in the EU?
Well, some people in the EU say that, but the most common comment you get is we want Britain to continue playing its global role in Yemen, in North Korea, where we have an embassy and the Americans don't have an embassy.
But can I ask you one, because we did talk about your colleague Kwasi Kwarteng, now a member of the government in the Brexit department, said last year that he thought that Britain ought to actually be backing Field Marshal Haftar, who I know you are concerned about is now acting in far too aggressive a way. Should we be backing a so-called strongman, or actually should we be taking much more active steps to resist what he's trying to do, which is apparently to overthrow the government that the UN supports?
Well, our view is that there isn't a military solution that's possible. We don't think that he would be able to take Tripoli, and we think, in fact, if this continues, what we're really risking is a really bloody civil war. And what people want is for Britain to play its role in Libya in trying to mediate. That's what I've been in touch with today. I talked to my counterpart in Saudi Arabia. I've talked to my counterpart in the Emirates, and I'm hoping to talk to my Egyptian counterpart tomorrow to try and do everything we can to avoid that kind of bloody civil war. But it does show that Britain has a big role outside Europe, and that's something we shouldn't forget.
I understand that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but just one word. Have you urged France to... Because France is seen to be supporting Haftar, would you urge them to stop doing that?
Well, I have to say we make a common front with France in nearly every area of foreign policy outside Europe, so we talk to them the whole time about these issues.
Very good to see you. Thanks very much for coming on tonight, Foreign Secretary. Anushka, I think you've got one or two things to share with us.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. They are still talking in Brussels at the moment. I mentioned dessert. Apparently, they've still got their warm scallop salad on the table, and in fact, it has gone cold, so they're nowhere near dessert. I just want to show you quickly this piece in The Spectator by James Forsyth, which shows you that there are real worries on the Brexit side of the argument. He says that a general election will be dangerous for Brexit. It could lead to a Tory leader who wants a free trade agreement, but it could mean no Brexit at all. That's why he thinks MPs should have backed the withdrawal agreement, so the argument could happen once we've already left. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. Quite a lot to pick up, I think, from that lengthy conversation. I mean, Justine, can I just ask you, do you have any confidence that if, as I say, John McDonald wasn't exactly holding out great hope that there's going to be a deal with the government, but if a deal was done, it would stand the test of time and that a deal would actually get through Parliament?
Not really, no.
Because
I think if there was a consensus that was going to emerge in Parliament, it would have already happened.
Why do you say that?
Because we've been talking about it for 3 years and not decided what kind of Brexit we want.
You say that, except one of the things that many people, I don't know what you feel about this, John, would say has been a failure of the Prime Minister's strategy is that she focused exclusively on the so-called divorce, how much we're going to pay the EU to leave, keeping the border open on the island of Ireland, obviously rights for EU citizens living here and our citizens living in the EU, but has not remotely ever tried to sell a vision of our future relationship with the EU. I mean, we're now trying to have that debate in, a couple of days, and it's a debate that some would say should have been taking place.
It should.
For months and years.
I think one of the mistakes that was made was that we conceded to the EU right at the start that we should talk about the financial settlement and the Northern Irish border before we would be allowed to start to talk about the future trading agreement. It seemed to me that gave away one of the principal objectives of Brexit right from the very beginning. The two shouldn't have ever been separated. We should have been talking about the future relationship right from the start, and then we wouldn't have had the delay whilst we had to wait until we were given permission by the EU that we could actually begin to talk about future trading agreement. And by separating the two, we lost a lot of our negotiating position.
And how will, if it is the 31st of October, classic EU compromise, sort of midway between what the Prime Minister and France want and what Tusk wants. It's quite a long delay, isn't it, John? How will you and your colleagues feel about that?
Well, I mean, we will be very unhappy. You only had to look at the number of Conservative members of Parliament who last night voted against any extension beyond the current. It was something like 100 with another 80 abstentions. There is no question that overwhelmingly the view of the Conservative Party was that we are elected to deliver Brexit and we simply cannot go on putting it off and kicking it down the road in this way.
Melanie, your party is divided between those who think that the future for Labour is largely to be the party of those who want to stay in the EU, and people like yourself who say that quite a lot of core Labour supporters want Brexit. How do you reconcile what looks like pretty much as irreconcilable a split as the Tories have?
Well, can I just say two things? I mean, I think that the hard Brexiteers in the Tory party are realising that their opportunity for Brexit is slipping away and that a long delay will mean that it is far less likely that we get Brexit at all. And I think that they have misplayed their hand. When it comes to the negotiations, I'm not entirely sure why the Labour Party is attaching a second referendum to these negotiations, because I think that that's an entirely separate procedural issue that should come separately from these negotiations. And in terms of trying to remedy things within the Labour Party, I hope that our voices are being heard. The conference position is something that I felt quite settled with, that as a very, very last resort, on a deal that the Prime Minister...
I mean, we're already past two deadlines. Surely we're at the last.
I know. Well, we were, and now we're at another one. So, I mean, it does seem to keep going on interminably, but, so whenever the Prime Minister or the EU decides our next deadline is, that is when we should be talking about this is the deal that potentially...
Yeah, it's the destination that never arrives, as far as we can see at the moment.
But I still think that there is an issue about the idea of it being a people's vote, and actually it's a second referendum by no other name, and actually
Melanie,
it's a way to
unfortunately,
revoke...
I've got to interrupt you. We've got lots more time to talk to all three of you in just a bit, but... So welcome back. In a moment, I'll be talking to the Vice President of the European Parliament, Mairead McGuinness. First, Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. Well, I think earlier this evening on the news, you said this was the night that it might actually come true that Brexit means breakfast.
I did.
And apparently that might be true. They could be going till 5 or 6 in the morning. But in the meantime, they're trying to rally around the October 31st Halloween extension, as they've called it. Andrew Byrne from the Sunday Times says it's backed by Sweden, Denmark, Ireland and others. It splits the difference between a long and short delay, but apparently France still holding out. Emmanuel Macron not quite there. In the meantime, Daniel Hewitt from ITV says that it looks like cross-party talks between Labour and the government falling apart live on ITV. Peston, John McDonald furious at Jeremy Hunt's suggestion that a future Tory leader wouldn't necessarily be bound by the agreement. And then my very favourite thing that I have to show you, the Metro front page from tomorrow, what Brexit looks like from space. That is a picture of an outline of a black hole. Robert.
We all love the front page of the Metro, and Brexit is a black hole. Now, I am delighted to be joined, I hope as we speak, from Brussels by Mairead McGuinness. Are you there, Mairead?
I'm here, and you've given me a little bit of laughter just listening to that analogy between Brexit and the black hole. But I think it's quite close, actually.
Yeah. So Mairead, we're hearing literally breaking news that EU leaders have agreed the 31st of October as the new Brexit date. For you, is that a good date? Would that be one you would support?
Well, look, I think for me, yes, at least we have a date. If that is the agreement, I'm getting slightly different word, but perhaps you're more up to date. That I think President Macron was still holding out for a shorter period, but maybe they've come to this compromise.
Yeah.
And for me, I just want certainty. I think from the European Parliament's point of view, there are now issues around this date which will impact us here in the European Parliament. But there was obviously a lot of debate amongst the leaders about the right thing to do. And I suppose I was listening to your conversations with your other panellists before you came to me, and I suppose the difficulty is that the conversations are so focused on the United Kingdom, but Brexit is more than an event. It's more than a one-off. It has implications for every single member state and for Europe itself. So the leaders are trying to protect the European Union, and I think we have to do that while at the same time trying to negotiate a settlement with the United Kingdom. So these are difficult days, and I think tonight's dinner, which probably went cold as they talked, is obviously a very serious moment because of the timing.
Absolutely right. And can I just ask you as sort of somebody who wears a number of hats, obviously you've got your EU hat on, but also your Republic of Ireland hat on. If it is the 31st of October, many would say that takes the urgency out of the debate back here in the UK. Some would say that makes it even harder for the Prime Minister to get any deal approved. Do you think it is now much more likely that there is no Brexit?
I don't think that at all, because there are times when I find it difficult to think straight about Brexit. The only thing I can deal with are the facts. I am listening and watching how public opinion might be changing, and it is the decision of the United Kingdom and its politicians to decide on what might happen. I think the truth of the matter is the fact that we're discussing this at the late hour in 2019, a vote that was taken in the United Kingdom in 2016, suggests to me that the people going into that vote were not told how difficult this would be, and there was no plan. And trying to plan after an event is always more difficult than before. And some of the debates that have happened since the referendum have been very enlightening, and they should have happened before a referendum was called. And I suppose if I'm a little bit angry, it's perhaps because I am a little bit angry. This is a very difficult reality that we're trying to deal with. I know for people in the United Kingdom it's also very difficult, those who voted leave and those who voted remain. And I take no pleasure pleasure in the reality that the United Kingdom is deeply divided in society and indeed in the House of Commons. But that is a ripple effect that affects all of us. It affects my constituents along that invisible border. It affects us here in the European Parliament, where we're trying to get on with other very big challenges that the European Union faces. So I don't think that giving this long of an extension is any excuse for anyone in the United Kingdom to take a break. Please don't do that. You have to get on with the business of sorting out Brexit.
And we haven't got long, but one final quick question. The Prime Minister became persuaded that a no-deal Brexit was highly dangerous because she thought it could lead to actually a border poll, direct rule by the British government in Northern Ireland, a border poll, and then potentially the breakup of the United Kingdom, with Northern Ireland potentially voting to join the Republic. Is that something that you think the Republic has also thought about as likely to happen in those circumstances?
I think we all know how that might happen because it's written in the Good Friday Agreement, which marks its 21st anniversary today. It's very clear that it would have to be unity by consent of the people on the island of Ireland. And I think trying to mix these issues is not helpful because it polarises the politics. But there is no doubt that what has happened since Brexit is leading to conversations taking place. So I would hope that the British Prime Minister is focusing on her role at the moment, which is to try and deliver on an agreement she negotiated with the European Union. But there may be other issues that emerge, not just tonight, but indeed in the months ahead. And I think this story is going to evolve. I think there'll be more late nights.
Mairead McGuinness, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Great pleasure talking to you. If I could just pick up very briefly with what we are hearing out of Brussels tonight, which is a compromise end date of the 31st of October and a so-called review of where we are at the end of June. Justine, how do you think your party will react to that?
Well, I think we are where we are, aren't we? It was pretty clear to me that we will need some sort of a long extension in order to be able to finally arrive at a strategy. What we can't now do is waste the time that we've been given. My personal view is we'll continue to go round in circles and in the end we'll break the deadlock through a people's vote. And the earlier piece you had on how disconnected the Conservative Party's become with young people, this is no surprise. It's been happening for literally 10 years. But one of the ways you can reconnect with young people is to give them a vote on Brexit.
John, in your wing of the party, I imagine, you know, there will be absolute fury if the date is the 31st of October.
Well, I'm not quite sure what is achieved simply by pushing it away again. What will happen, of course, is it means we have to fight European elections, another thing which the Prime Minister told us absolutely we would not do. And just pushing it to the 31st of October doesn't make it any more likely that we are going to get an agreement.
We're almost out of time. Who would you like to see as Prime Minister?
I think we need a new Conservative leader, and I'd like somebody who believes in Brexit.
But give us a name.
Well, there are several who fit that category, but...
Come on, give a name, John.
I personally think that Boris would do a very good job. But
there we go, we got a name. We got a name.
Would also.
Justine, is Boris going to be your new Prime Minister? Oh, I'm out of time! What a night, what a week, what a year! We're a little bit knackered, so we're having a 2-week break. We'll see you after Easter. See you then. Bye!